Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in the Gospel of John, chapter 18, and Jesus finished a most powerful prayer for us in chapter 17. And now, of course, we get to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Um, You know what's interesting about as we go through this, because there's a couple of ways we can process this when we read it. One, it was necessary. So, and then it was God's eternal purpose. And then the other, from a human, I'm going to say, a human perspective, that if you could, would you have, if you were there, would you have stopped the death of Jesus? Let's just kind of think about that. Okay, think about that as we go through and we read this chapter. I want you to think about that. Okay, so let's jump to it. John chapter 18. Now keep in mind, I want you to keep that in mind. If you could have stopped the beating, the arrests, the beatings, and the murders of Jesus, would you have? Keep that in mind. Um, Verse 1, after Jesus had said these things, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden. He and his disciples went into it. Now, this was sort of their hangout place, this garden. They would come here oftentimes, okay? Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So, he obviously would know where they chill out, okay? First thing, so Judas took a company of soldiers and some temple police from the chief priests and the Pharisees and came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Now, John skips the intense prayer. Jesus goes to the garden and he prays, and he prayed for about 3 hours. So John skips that and jumps right to the arrest, okay? Now, these temple police were the police or soldiers that worked in the temple. They were kind of, you could say they worked for the temple. They wasn't Roman soldiers. Verse 4, then Jesus, knowing everything that was about to happen to him, went out and said to them, who is it that you're looking for? Jesus the Nazarene, they answered. I am he, Jesus told him. Judas, who betrayed him, was also standing with them. So in other words, when Judas came, he didn't go and stand with Jesus and the apostles. He stood with the soldiers. And when they told him, I am he, they stepped back and fell to the ground. Some people see this as a manifestation of the power of God, that it kind of knocked them down. That, I used to see that too for years, but that's not what that is saying. Actually, he said they stepped back and fell to the ground, so they could have just stumbled over each other. All right. Then he asked them again, who is it you're looking for? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. I told you I am he. Jesus replied, so if you're looking for me, let these go. This was to fulfill the words he said, I have lost none that you have given me. Oh, sometimes, when I see this, I don't know what that means. Another verses would say that I lost none, but except Judas. But anyway, verse 10, then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. That slave name was Malchus. Now, excuse me. The slave name was Malchus. Now, watch this. When he talks about a sword, we probably would more say dagger, probably somewhere around the neighborhood of 18 inches, something like that. So it wasn't like a big sword, but long enough to slice his ear off. Now watch what happens. At that, Jesus says to Peter, "Sheathe your sword. Am I not to drink the cup the Father had given me?" So I just answered now the question for you when I said, would you have stopped the arrest of Jesus? Peter did. Now, what is going to be interesting is that Peter, now remember, Peter would, he had said earlier, when Jesus said, "You all," one, he said, "One is going to betray me," and then he said, "All of you are going to kind of like leave me, desert me." And Peter go, "Not me." Oh, and Peter was so arrogant. He said, "Even if these," and he pointed to his fellow disciples, "if they leave you, I would never forsake you. I would never deny you. I would never betray you." Now watch this. So now is Peter living up to his word? He drew his sword. Now this is also kind of interesting because for Peter to have been with Jesus for 3.5 years, why would he do such a foolish thing? He should have known this was foolish. And why was it foolish? Well, he said, "Am I not to drink the cup the Father has given me?" In other words, this is what Peter is attempting to stop, right? Um, there's another thought to that. The disciples thought Jesus was going to be the king, the Messiah. He's going to come in and he was going to, break the yoke off of Israel's neck. He was going to ride in with a white charger as the Messiah and restore Israel to its glory. Now, we see that in Acts 10, that they still don't get it. They still don't get it. That they were asking him, "Are you going to restore Israel at this time?" That's what they were looking for. So now, all of a sudden, here's Peter. He is going to try to expedite this. But again, of all the 3 years that Peter had been with Jesus, why wasn't he cognitive of this error? John the Baptist said, because when he came, what they missed, John the Baptist said, "Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world." So they missed that coming. And then, but also just kind of look at this. Let's say that Peter would have said, well, first of all, it would have been a bloodbath. The foolishness is that he was outgunned. Judas had bought a little kind of army, a little army, and Peter had just one little sword. So that's the first thing. So the first thing, then all of them would have been killed, or potentially they could have been killed because of his foolish actions. But worse is, let's suppose Peter was successful and Jesus didn't drink the cup. So what's the outcome of that? The wrath of God abiding on us. The wrath of God abiding on us. That's what's worse about what Peter is doing here. So verse 12, then the company of soldiers, the commanders, the Jewish temple police, arrest Jesus and tied him up. First, they led him to Annas, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews that it was advantageous that one should die for the people. Okay. Now, Jesus actually had three, you can say, trials. Two kangaroo and then one before Pilate. Now, it was the Jews could not by Roman law execute Jesus. So they had to try to trump up the charges so they're going to spend the night with two different hearings. They're going to spend the night trying to trump up charges to take to Pilate so that Pilate would issue the execution order. So they first go to Caiaphas. I'm sorry, Annas. All right. Meanwhile, he said Simon Peter was following Jesus, as was another disciple. So some people believe this to be John. Okay. Then he says that disciple was an acquaintance of the high priest. So he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter remained standing outside by the door. So the other disciples, the one known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the girl who was the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Now, again, it's not clear. A lot of people just believe this is the Apostle John. But we also have to remember that James and John, Peter and Andrew, and then Philip and Nathaniel. So 6 of his disciples were devout Jews. They were devout Jews, and they followed. They would make sure that they attended the 3 festivals commanded by Moses. In other words, they were devout Jews. So the fact that John knew the high priest, the fact that John knew, that he was known around the temple, in and of itself is not, out of pocket for John. So he comes and he actually then hooks up. Now so if it wasn't John, we don't have to argue over that. Because again, the text itself is not crystal clear who the other disciple was. All right. Verse 17. The slave girl who was the doorkeeper said to Peter, "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" Now remember Peter, he said, "I would never deny you. I would never ever deny you. I am not." To all that boasting that Peter did, "I am not," he said. Now the slaves and the temple police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold. They were standing and warming themselves, and Peter was standing with them, warming himself. Now, if you let me kind of give you I'm going to come out of this for a moment and kind of try to show you this. If I could pull up my slides here. Oh, I have a little slide. I hope I did not delete them, but they're way up here. I have to find them. I got a little one of the temple. Is this it here? Here it is. Yes. This is the better one probably. Okay. And let me see if I got another one. No, that's a map. All right, this one here, this is of the temple. So you have the temple, and then as you can see, outside the temple itself. So once you go in, this is a kind of an artist's rendition. And so if you can look and you could see outside of the temple, in other words, they wouldn't be inside, but what was called the temple complex. Is this one? Okay, so outside the temple complex. So you see the temple building itself, and then you see the complex, which would have been outside. So Peter then would have been standing somewhere outside in this court here. and it would have been cold. It would have been, and that's why they were warming themselves, because it would have been, um, when he said that they're warming themselves, uh, again, they would have been outside. Okay. Um, so, now we'll get back to Peter, right? Verse 19, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Now, this is bogus. They already knew. Watch Jesus' response. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus answered. I've always taught in the synagogues and in the temple complex. I mean, again, outside the temple complex. He says, where all the Jews congregate, and I haven't spoken anything in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who heard what I told them. Look, they know what I said. Now, Jesus is not going to put up a great defense, but this right here alone shuts them down, because they could have asked the crowd, well, what did Jesus actually say? By the way, they already knew. And when he had said these things, one of the temple police standing by, slapped Jesus, saying, is this the way you answer the high priest? Jesus responds, if I have spoken wrongly, Jesus answered him, give evidence about the wrong, but if rightly, why do you hit me? That was against the law. Then, notice this, then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. And this would be sort of the ruling people that's going to make the decision to send Jesus to Pilate. And it is interesting that they're having this court all night, not with it, like not in the daytime. Now back to Peter. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They said to him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the high priest's slave, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, didn't I see you with him in the garden? Now remember, this is they witnessed Peter slice his ear off. Now John did not cover this, but remember Peter healed his ear. So that slave, if he probably had saw him, he would have had a healed ear, maybe blood on his clothes. Verse 27, Peter denied it again. Immediately the rooster crowed. Okay, now we see the anguish. The other gospels tell about the anguish of Peter. That wow, that he did that. In fact, Luke even tells us that Luke tells us that that when Peter did this, Peter was sitting here. That Jesus was sitting right there in earshot. And when he denied, Jesus turns to Peter and looks him right in the face. Looks him right in the face. And Peter, and this was a hard denial. In other words, Peter went from I will never deny you to slicing the dude's ears off to I don't know him. And the Bible said he brought curse. He started cursing, not like may my mother belly swell up, or may my kids grow third eyed. Something he really cursed to if I know this man. And then Jesus turns and looks at him. Now history and our church tradition tells us that Peter never forgave himself. That Peter was so guilt-ridden that even as tradition tells us he would be martyred, that when it came time for him to die, he requested that he would be crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified as his Lord. The guilt never left him. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.